You were taught that gravity is a force. One of the basic ones. Something that pulls objects together. You drop a ball, it falls. You jump, you come back down. Planets orbit stars because gravity pulls them inward. It feels obvious. So obvious that most people never question it. Physics did. And the moment it did, gravity stopped looking like a force at all. This is where the trouble starts, because gravity behaves nothing like the other forces you learned about. Electromagnetism pushes and pulls through fields. The strong force binds particles together. The weak force changes identities. Gravity refuses to fit that mold. You can shield electric fields. You can cancel magnetic forces. You cannot turn gravity off. No matter what you do, everything with mass responds the same way. Drop a hammer and a feather in a vacuum, and they fall together. Not almost together. Exactly together. That fact alone should make you uneasy. If gravity were a force acting on objects, heavier objects should fall differently. They don't. Gravity ignores composition. It ignores structure. It treats everything the same. That is not how forces behave. This bothered physicists for centuries. But it wasn't until Einstein that the illusion finally broke. And when it did, gravity didn't just change description. It changed category. Gravity is not something acting on objects. It is something happening to space and time. That sentence sounds dramatic, but it is painfully literal. Objects in free fall are not being pulled at all. They are doing exactly what they would do if gravity didn't exist. They are moving in straight lines. The problem is that in the presence of mass, straight lines are not straight anymore. Space and time curve. Gravity is not a force pulling you down. It is the geometry of space-time telling you what straight means. If that sounds abstract, good, because your everyday picture of gravity was wrong at the level where it matters. This is where people start calling gravity an illusion, and that word causes even more confusion. Gravity is not fake. It is not imagined. You hit the ground just as hard either way. The illusion is thinking there is a pulling force doing the work. There isn't. When you fall, nothing is pulling you. You're following the straightest possible path through curved space-time. The ground rushes up to meet you because it is prevented from following that same path. Standing on the ground is what requires force. Falling does not. That reversal alone should snap your intuition in half. You feel weight when you stand still, not when you fall. That should tell you something fundamental about what gravity really is. If gravity were a force pulling you down, you would feel it most when falling. You don't. You feel it when the floor stops you from falling. The force you feel is the floor, not gravity. This is where the everyday story collapses. Gravity does not pull. It does not reach out. It does not act at a distance. It shapes the stage. Everything moves on. Mass and energy tell space-time how to curve. Curved space-time tells matter how to move. That's the entire theory. And it works with terrifying accuracy. Once you accept this, a lot of strange things suddenly make sense. Light bends near massive objects, not because gravity pulls on light, but because light follows straight paths too. Those paths just aren't straight in the way you imagined. Time runs slower near massive objects, not because gravity affects clocks, but because time itself is part of the geometry being warped. Orbits are not the result of a constant inward pull balanced by sideways motion. They are natural paths in a curved geometry. Remove the geometry, and the force disappears with it. This is why astronauts in orbit are weightless. Not because gravity is weak up there, it isn't. They are falling constantly, following straight paths, never hitting the ground, no force, no pull, no illusion of weight, just geometry. This is the part Feynman loved pointing at because it exposes how badly language misleads you. Calling gravity a force works at human scale, but it hides what is really happening. It gives you a false mental picture. The universe does not behave as if gravity is pulling things together. It behaves as if spacetime itself is curved, and objects are doing the only thing they can do in that geometry. Now comes the uncomfortable part. If gravity is not a force, then asking how gravity is transmitted makes no sense. There is no signal traveling, no mediator particle pulling on things. The curvature is just there. You don't ask how distance is transmitted. You don't ask how geometry is sent from place to place. Gravity is not a message. It is a condition. This is why attempts to quantize gravity keep running into trouble. Not because gravity is mystical, but because it is not like the other forces at all. Treating it as one may be the mistake. So, is gravity an illusion? No. But the idea that gravity is a force pulling objects together? Absolutely is. The real shock is not that gravity isn't real. It's that the thing you thought was real never existed in the first place. If gravity is not a force pulling objects together, then the idea of being under the influence of gravity starts to look backward. You are not being acted on by something invisible. You are moving exactly the way spacetime allows you to move. This is why the most honest description of gravity begins with the strange claim: objects in free fall are not accelerating. They are doing nothing at all. They are coasting. That sounds absurd until you realize what acceleration actually means in physics. Acceleration is not about speed. It is about being forced away from a natural path. And the only time you feel acceleration is when something prevents you from following that path. When you stand on the ground, you feel your weight. Your feet press into the floor. Your body strains. Something is pushing on you. That something is not gravity. It is the ground. The ground is forcing you off your natural trajectory through spacetime. In free fall, there is no such force. That is why astronauts feel weightless. Not because gravity disappears, but because nothing is stopping them from moving the way spacetime tells them to move. This flips everything. Weight is not a measure of gravity's pull. Weight is a measure of resistance to motion. You feel heavy when you are prevented from falling, not when you are falling. That should permanently ruin the idea of gravity as a pulling force. Now look at how this explains something that always felt mysterious. Why do all objects fall the same way, regardless of their mass? Why does a feather fall at the same rate as a hammer in a vacuum? Because gravity is not acting on the object. Spacetime is curved the same way for everything. Different objects follow the same geometry. Their internal composition doesn't matter. The path is the path. This is why gravity cannot be shielded. There is nothing to block. You can block forces. You can intercept particles. You cannot block geometry. You cannot put up a wall and say, "Spacetime, stop curving here." This is also why gravity affects light. Light has no mass. A force-based picture struggles with that. Geometry has no problem at all. Light follows the same straightest paths as everything else. Once you accept this, the question, "Is gravity an illusion?" starts to sound strange. Gravity is not illusory. Your mental picture of it was. The illusion was thinking there was something reaching across space, grabbing objects, and pulling them together. There isn't. The universe is not tugging on you. It is shaping the paths available to you. This is why gravity does not weaken with shielding. only with distance and geometry. As mass spreads out, curvature changes. That's it. Now consider what this does to the idea of cause. In the old picture, mass causes gravity, which causes motion. In the geometric picture, mass and energy shape spacetime, and motion follows automatically. There is no intermediate step, no mechanism pushing things around. The presence of mass changes the geometry. The geometry defines the paths. Objects follow those paths unless something stops them. Gravity is not something that happens. It is something that is. This is why gravity feels so fundamental. It is not layered on top of reality. It is woven into the structure of space-time itself. Now think about how radical that actually is. Space and time are not passive backgrounds. They are dynamic. They respond. They curve. They stretch. They slow clocks and bend rulers. Gravity is not in space. Gravity is space behaving differently. And once you accept that, the idea of gravity as a force becomes not just wrong, but unnecessary. Now comes the part that makes people uneasy. If gravity is geometry, then asking what causes gravity is like asking what causes distance, or what causes angles to add up the way they do on a sphere. Geometry does not have a cause in the way forces do. It is a description. You don't ask what causes the fact that parallel lines meet at the poles on a globe. You accept that this is what curved surfaces do. Mass energy curves spacetime because that is how spacetime behaves in the presence of mass energy. There is no deeper explanation in terms of pushes or pulls. That is not a failure of physics. It is the point where explanation stops looking like a story and starts looking like structure. This is why Feynman always warned against mistaking descriptions for mechanisms. Gravity works not because there is something making it work, but because space-time has the properties it has. And now comes the truly unsettling realization. If gravity is geometry, then it is not something you can turn off, not because it is powerful, but because it is fundamental to what space and time are. You cannot remove geometry from space. You cannot remove time from space-time. You cannot remove gravity without removing the stage everything moves on. So, is gravity an illusion? No. But the idea that gravity is a force pulling objects together is one of the most successful illusions ever taught. The real gravity is quieter, colder, more ruthless. It does not push. It does not pull. It does not act. It defines, and everything else follows. Think about how strange it is that you ever believed gravity was a force at all. You imagine something reaching across empty space, grabbing objects, and pulling them together. That picture felt natural because it matched how muscles work. Push, pull, effort, resistance. The universe does not work like muscles. In the geometric picture, nothing reaches out, nothing grabs, nothing exerts effort. Objects move the way they move because there is no alternative path available to them. This is the part that usually breaks people's intuition completely. In curved spacetime, not falling requires force. Falling does not. When you are standing still on Earth, you are accelerating upward. You just don't feel it that way. The ground is constantly pushing you off the path spacetime wants you to follow. That push is what you feel as weight. When you fall, the push disappears. You stop accelerating. You become inertial. This is why astronauts feel weightless even though Earth's gravity is still acting on them. They are not being pulled down. They are allowed to move freely. Gravity is not something that happens to objects. It is something objects stop resisting. Once you accept that, the word illusion starts to make more sense, but not in the way people usually mean it. Gravity is not an illusion because its effects are imaginary. It is an illusion because your mind insists on inventing a force where none exists. The illusion is thinking gravity causes motion. The reality is that geometry removes alternatives. This also explains something that once felt mysterious. Why does gravity affect time? Clocks run slower near massive objects. This sounds impossible if gravity is a force. Forces don't slow time. Geometry does. Time is part of spacetime. When spacetime curves, time curves with it. A clock closer to a massive object is not malfunctioning. It is following a different path through spacetime. Nothing is acting on the clock. Nothing is interfering with it. The path itself is different. This is why gravity can never be fully described without talking about time. Any explanation that treats gravity as something acting only in space is already broken. Gravity is spacetime behaving differently in different places. Now take one more step, because this is where the illusion finally collapses completely. If gravity is geometry, then asking where gravity is makes no sense. It is not located somewhere. It is not emitted. It does not travel. It does not propagate like a wave in the usual sense. Changes in geometry can propagate. Gravitational waves exist, but the curvature itself is not a thing moving through space. It is the structure of space changing. You don't ask where north is flowing from. You don't ask how angles propagate on a surface. Gravity belongs to that category. This is why gravity stubbornly resists being treated like the other forces. Every attempt to force it into that mold introduces contradictions. It behaves too differently because it is something different. Now consider the deepest implication of all. If gravity is not a force, then the idea that it is something added to the universe is wrong. Gravity is not an extra feature layered on top of space and time. It is what space and time do when matter exists. This means gravity was never discovered in the way electricity was discovered. It was recognized. Space and time were always behaving this way. We just didn't know how to describe it correctly. The illusion lasted because the wrong picture worked well enough for centuries. That should make you cautious about other pictures you still take for granted. Feynman understood this danger better than most. He knew that physics advances not by adding complexity, but by removing false assumptions. Gravity was never explained by finding a better force. It was explained by discarding the idea of force entirely. So, is gravity just an illusion? Here is the precise answer. Gravity is not an illusion. The force of gravity is. What is real is curvature. What is real is geometry. What is real is the fact that the universe does not provide a flat, neutral stage for motion. Objects move the way they do because space-time is shaped the way it is. No pulling, no pushing, no invisible hands, just structure. And once you see that, gravity stops being mysterious in the old way. There is no hidden agent to uncover. No deeper mechanism waiting to be found behind it. Gravity is not something happening in the universe. It is the universe happening. At the end of all this, the word illusion needs to be handled carefully. Gravity is not an illusion in the sense that it is fake or imagined. You fall. Planets orbit. Light bends. Clocks slow. Those effects are as real as anything in physics ever gets. The illusion was always a story you told yourself about why they happen. You imagined a force because forces are familiar. Muscles pull, ropes pull, magnets pull. It was natural to add gravity to that list. The universe tolerated that misunderstanding for a long time because it worked well enough until it didn't. Once measurements became precise enough, the force picture cracked, not gradually, completely. And what replaced it was not a better force, but the realization that gravity was never playing that role at all. Gravity does not act on objects. Objects act freely unless prevented. That single reversal explains everything gravity does, without inventing anything extra. The ground does not stop you because gravity pulls you down. It stops you because you are already falling. Your weight is not evidence of gravity's strength. It is evidence of resistance. Planets do not orbit because something is tugging them inward. They orbit because curved spacetime gives them no straighter path. Once you internalize this, gravity stops being mysterious and starts being inevitable. There is no hidden mechanism behind it. There is no deeper layer making it work. Spacetime has the properties it has. Matter and energy curve it. Motion follows. That is not a story. It is a statement of structure. This is why gravity feels so different from the other forces. It is not an interaction inside spacetime. It is a property of spacetime itself. Trying to treat it like the others is like trying to describe the shape of a map as something drawn on top of the map. It was never added. It was always there. So is gravity just an illusion? Only in the sense that the force you imagined never existed. What exists is something far stranger and far simpler. A universe where the shortest paths are curved, where falling is the natural state, where standing still requires effort. A universe where geometry replaces force and motion follows without being pushed. That realization does not make gravity less real. It makes it more fundamental. And it leaves you with one final, unsettling clarity. The universe does not push you down. It simply does not give you a flat place to stand. And once you see that, the question stops being whether gravity is an illusion and becomes something much quieter. How many other forces you think you understand are really just your intuition refusing to let go of the wrong picture?